My name is Beth Karlin, and I'm here from the University of California, Irvine. I run a lab called the Transformational Media Lab, which I will unpackage and then talk a little bit about some of the work I'm doing on film. So I'm going to start with kind of the underlying assumptions. There are three main assumptions that guide this work. The first is that, and John, I think I mentioned it on our phone call, and he put it in our intro, ruined my thunder. But the first is that technology and new media are significantly changing the way that we interact with our built social and natural environments. And we see from cell phones in South Africa to multi-person chat rooms in Ames, Iowa, that the way we're interacting with the world around us is changing in huge, huge ways, in ways that we couldn't have predicted 10, 20 years ago. And the second assumption is, although there's a lot of work, especially in psychology, my home discipline, about the disassociative role of technology and how it's being used to disconnect us from each other. We can play video games or go hiking, right? We can chat on Facebook or meet for coffee. I don't necessarily, like John said, feel that dichotomy is necessary. And there are huge opportunities to leverage these changes for pro-social and pro-environmental benefit. And then the third is important as a researcher and at an academic event, is that I believe a social scientific approach really has a lot to contribute to this work. So although there are a lot of people that are out there doing this, I think it's important that we can add, like I think Case gave such great examples of, theory and methodology with which to test, leverage, and improve this potential to make sure that we're making the most of these amazing opportunities to use technology and new media and the new ways we're communicating. So based on those three underlying assumptions, I founded a lab called the Transformational Media Lab at UCI, and our lab studies how media is and can be used to transform individuals, communities, and systems. And by media, I don't mean just film. I'm talking about film today. Really, a medium, is any way of communicating information between individuals. So when I say media, I'm referring broadly to information and communication technology. I work primarily in two areas. The area that I typically speak in environmental conferences about is on smart grid and energy efficiency, but I'm excited to talk about some of my other work, which I've never done here before, on film and social change. And so I'm going to talk about three kind of ways that we're looking at media and transformation. And this is three different kind of roles, and these are not orthogonal. There's definitely overlap there, but for the purpose of telling a story, I'm going to talk about them in these three ways. The first is media as descriptive. We can describe transformation or tell stories using film or other media. And the second is instrumental. We can use media as a tool. So we have a film or a piece of media. How can we leverage that through other forms of technology, through campaigns? And the third is constitutive. Media as transformation itself. How does the media making process engage and affect those that are engaged with it? And I'll get into those one at a time. And I kind of shorten those as storytelling, engagement, and activism, and I'll tell one little story about each of those. So first, descriptive, film as story, media as story, as storytelling. So a colleague, Emily Varellen at the Fledgling Fund, said something. Now, she didn't call it a hypothesis. She wrote a paper making these statements, but as an academic, I go, that's a hypothesis. You haven't tested it yet. And she says, we often see multiple films on very similar subjects or with a similar social change goal. So I thought, well, is that true? And that was pretty easy to find. I just grabbed some students and I said, find lots of films. And so they've compiled some databases and lists of films. So food, climate, water, transportation. We definitely see multiple films on similar subjects with very similar social change goals. Check. And then Emily went on to say, within the range of storytelling, some of these methods truly speak to an audience by sparking emotions, and others do little more than entertain or inform. And I thought, well, that's a good hypothesis for a psychologist to start looking into. And so we started what we call our Affect to Action project. So some films can move us from affect into acting. What are those films? How do they do that? And so we started with some theory development, and we're now completing our content analysis and working on getting some funding to test, because that's obviously the most important part. Well, maybe not, but I'll talk about the work we've done so far. And really one of the things that really got to me, other than Emily's statement, there was a film, I believe it was called Devil Came on Horseback, about about genocide in Darfur. And the narrator at one point looks at the camera and he says, "You're watching this film and you care a lot, but the credits are going to roll and you're going to go buy a Diet Coke." And it was a packed room. There was a Q&A after with John Prendergast. It was amazing, and I thought, we are. Most of us. So how do we go from affect to action? How do we get these films to not just make us feel, but act? And so I thought psychology can help. So this is what we did. This is our methodology. I'm going to clean it up for a publication. But we read lots of psychology, watched lots of movies, looked for patterns, developed a coding sheet, and then watched the movies again a little more empirically with some inter-rater reliability. So that's what we did. And what we came up with was what we call this affect to action framework, and a set of real strategies. And within each of these 5 tools, each of them is based on some sort of theory, and with it are suggestions for filmmakers. And we actually are just starting, this is exciting, I've never said this in public before, I just started a venture with colleagues at USC and Cinecause, a couple filmmakers, and we're going to be training filmmakers on storytelling, on all the material I'm presenting. And we're launching at the Topanga Film Festival in July and the Hollywood Film Festival in October, because where better to find filmmakers than at film festivals. But for our sake, I'm just going to kind of talk about 2 of them very, very briefly. I'm going to talk about the first and the last. So establish relevance to increase the level of involvement. And for that, I went to Construal level theory. So I pulled out some theory from psychology and how could that inform film and filmmaking. And Trope and Lieberman said that our response to information is in some ways inversely proportional to the psychological distance we feel from it. So, and they say there are 4 types of psychological distance: spatial, temporal, so space, time, social, and hypothetical. So put it simply, information that's here and now given to me with high certainty reduces psychological distance, and I'm more likely to act upon it. Climate change is over 4, right? So there's a challenge there, but there's ways that filmmakers can overcome and reduce psychological distance. And what we did was we looked not just at psychological theory, but film theory, and how can framing and editing techniques reduce psychological distance. And like I said, we've come up with a list that we share with filmmakers, but some of them are like first-person narrative. If anyone has seen this film, Super Size Me, Morgan Spurlock, the narrator, the filmmaker, eats nothing but McDonald's for 30 days and tells the story of industrial food. Contrasting that with a film like some of the other food films, Fresh, Food Fight, Food Inc., that are third person. They're a little higher in psychological distance. We connect. If anyone's seen this film, you laugh with him, you cringe when he throws up, it's horrible. So we're really kind of bought into this story, and we know this. This is what I think Case's work gets at, right? This social agency. Having an identifiable victim. And then there's also camera angles. Zooming in and out is a way of connecting things that are far away to that which is close, or things that are close to that which is far away. Addressing the viewer directly, right? The Office was good at that. No real social point, I just like The Office. Oh, did I cry when it ended? But sorry, back. And then the last one, empower audiences to engage in behavior. And this one I wanted to talk about because this is where we see documentaries really doing the worst job. They do a real good job of bumming us out, but empowering is really important. And for this, I looked at Rogers' protection motivation theory, and he says we need to perceive a problem to respond to it, but we also go through this appraisal process consciously or subconsciously, and we appraise both threat and our ability to cope. And there's 2 forms of coping appraisal, and I think it's important that we look at them because we often talk about efficacy as a single thing, but he says coping appraisal or efficacy is a function of both, can I do something? Is there a behavior there? And if I do, will it matter? So thinking about climate behaviors, can I change a light bulb? Yep. Will it matter? I don't know. Can I put panels on my roof? Nope. Would it matter? Maybe, but I can't afford it. I'm a renter. I'm moving, right? And so we need to look for, when we talk about because I think this work I'm talking about film, but translates to any sort of medium, and we're starting with film, but we also work on other forms of media as well. But to think about addressing viewers and empowering them. This sucks. Here's what you can do. Here's how it'll make a difference. And so here, what has been done, what can be done, what are you doing as the storyteller, what can the viewer do, how can they do it, and can they do it with you? Because if you tell a good story and they do buy into you, they want to do it with you. And we've learned that from a lot of the projects we work with. I'll talk about one in particular, but Story of Stuff Project, Invisible Children, Kane's Arcade, they're all projects where viewers want to be a part of that. Like, I want to go to there. I want to do it with you. And if you're a good storyteller and you're charismatic, people will want to follow you. So make sure you're involved. Be specific, connect action to outcome, which I think Case talked about, and ask people to help. Don't ignore that. So the next form is instrumental. So we have this story. How do we use that story as a tool? How do we use film as a tool of transformation? And for that, I borrow it. Oh, is my quote gone? Oh, there, weird. I borrow a theory actually from sociology, which is this concept of a boundary object. And boundary objects are objects that kind of exist on their own. They have stable properties, but they can be used and leveraged by multiple parties for unique needs. So they're robust enough to maintain this common identity, like this film in the middle, but they can have different meanings and be used in different ways. An example that we saw is a short film called Kane's Arcade that was made by a filmmaker in Los Angeles, Nirvan Malik, and he just wanted to tell this great story about this cute kid that made a cardboard arcade, an arcade out of cardboard in his dad's used auto parts store in East LA. If you're ever in LA, come check it out. It's open most weekends. If you haven't seen it, watch it. It's 10 minutes worth your time. You might cry. But what he found is within a few weeks, the education community, teachers were going, this is a great film about education and about how STEAM, integrating arts into STEM, and Nirvan's like, I can't even pronounce pedagogy. What are they talking about? But because his film kind of was used as a boundary object, it could be leveraged by multiple groups for multiple purposes. And so when we look at film, and a lot of filmmakers are being very intentional about their use of films as boundary objects and creating, like Participant Media, specific social action campaigns for their films designed to give a voice to the issues. And Participant has made Inconvenient Truth, Food Inc., The Cove, Good Night and Good Luck, The Kite Runner, and on and on and on. And a lot of films do this. But I think, as a scientist, if you build it, this is from Field of Dreams. It's too young. No? Get that? If you build it, they will come. So if you build it, will they come? And we often look at this black box model. If you make a film, a black box model is one where there's no real information. So if you make a film, will there be outcomes? And we see a lot of people going, my film did this, films do this, people watch Food Inc., and then this is what happened. But how are we measuring that? How are we really? And what we're seeing is funders increasingly want to know. Bill Gates went to some of these filmmakers and said, why don't I just buy more mosquito nets? Charity Navigator is actually adding measurement and evaluation to their evaluation of nonprofits. That might be hot off the presses. Maybe I shouldn't have said that. Too late. We're seeing a participant, Jeff Skoll, who founded Participant, saying, now I look at whether my films succeed not by how much money they made, but whether I could have had more impact giving that money directly to education or climate change or whatever. So to do that, when we look, there are still questions. What's the program? What is this campaign? What is going on here? And how do we measure these outcomes? So what we need are clearly defined and operationalized programs. What is a film campaign? What is a film? What are you doing with it? Kind of building in, like I talked about, theory, and then really reliable and valid metrics for testing. That's some of the work that actually our colleagues at Harmony that I worked with in 2011 are doing, as well as our lab and the Lear Center actually just got $3.25 million from the Gates Foundation and the Knight Foundation to launch what's called the Media Impact Project to really look at metrics. So there's a huge effort going on to understand what we mean when we say media can make a difference. So we've been developing case studies, and these are some of the projects that we work with, some of our favorites, and looking at how are they distributing. So once you have this, are you putting it out in theaters, or are you going to high schools and distributing it? Are you going to festivals, or are you releasing it online to people for free? These are huge, and they have big implications. I think there's some really interesting implications we're interested in testing. We know from psychology that if people pay for something, that we're transactional. Some other speakers have talked about the transactional nature of humans. So if I give you money and I watch your film, we're done. Possibly. So if your goal is social action, you might not want to charge $8 at the door. Invite me for free. Then the transaction, Robert Cialdini talks about the principle of reciprocity. Come to our film. If you come see our film, We'd love for you to donate. That's Invisible Children's model. They've never charged a penny, and they brought in $20 million last year in donations, more than any film that sells at the box office. How are you marketing? And all these pictures are from Invisible Children. I'm going to talk about them at the end. They're my case that I'll chat about because we have a lot of data on them, and they're interesting. How are they targeting? Are you focusing in on a certain demographic? Is your film targeting the auto industry, nurses, everyone? Are you going after the whole world, or is there a certain niche that you want to go for? How are you branding, advertising, promoting? How are you getting the word out about your media project? Technology. What is your use of static, your website? I talk to filmmakers all the time, and it's so interesting. They'll go, oh, we'd love to talk to you about our project. And I look, and I go on their website, and I go, do you want your film to be shown in schools? And they go, yeah, that'd be great. And I go, you should have a section on your website for educators. And they're like, whoa, that's brilliant. I'm like, no, it's not, really. That's the great thing about being an expert. Like, you don't have to know. You just have to look at something for a while, and then you kind of know more than other people. I'm like, how does that make me smart? Like, didn't anybody think that? But what are they putting on your website? Who are you targeting? And social media, how are you interacting? Who are you reaching out to? Schools, places of worship. What kind of events are you doing? And this kind of gets into the next piece. Who are you collaborating with? What partner organizations? What celebrities do you have on board? Pete Wentz and Oprah are both big supporters of Invisible Children, actually. And lobbying. Is there an actual social or governmental change that you want to see, and are you engaging the people that watch your film in it? So finally, though, what's really interesting, what we started to see was that media is not just storytelling, and it's not just a tool that can be leveraged, but media can actually be constitutive of transformation, of change. That in participating, somebody else today talked about prosumption, came up in conversation a few times, that followers are engaging and becoming a part of the story themselves. And that, in effect, is changing the story and changing them. So as an example, film is participatory. I'll talk about, we see these new models of engagement where people are not just consumers, but participants, community members, citizens, prosumers, right? Henry Jenkins coined a term called participatory cultures, that where we see like Wikipedia, this is Burning Man, if anyone has a ticket, I'm looking to go this year, Occupy. And he says, participatory cultures are important, that not every member must contribute, but all must believe that they're free to contribute, and that when they do, their contribution will be valued. So we can build participatory cultures around our media, around our stories. And I think we have to really engage people, because that's the world we live in. Online, there are tons of ways of doing this. Offline, there are as well. So when we look at Invisible Children as a case, we saw, because through their school clubs and screenings, they had all these people involved ready when they called on them. So when we look at who gets involved, they were targeting and really reaching a ton of youth, and I'm going to start going fast, finding them from all different types of places. They didn't just get them on the internet. They went into schools. They got through friends and family. They have booths at rock concerts. So they're reaching youth where they're at. And the opportunities they give them to be involved range from tweeting to lobbying in DC, everything from the small to the super engaged. And when we see the impacts of that on the organization, they put out a little film last year called Coney 2012. What they saw was within hours, huge amounts of people in major American cities like Noblesville, Indiana, and Dayton, Ohio, were watching and spreading this film. But if you look at where Invisible Children has toured since 2004, guess what cities they're in? And then they asked their followers, if you like this film, share it. Share it with those people. And they had this on their website. You could click on the button of Oprah's face or Ellen's face, and it would automatically tweet them. And people did. And what happened was they got 100 million views in 6 days. It was the most viral piece of information in human history. But was it viral, or had they been planting this seed for years? And then said, go. And and then when they asked them to go to DC, this is what it looked like that year. It was amazing, 10,000 people. We have some data. We surveyed 500 of them and are looking at that right now. And we see impacts not only on the organization, but the people themselves. Being engaged changes us. And when we surveyed 2,000 participants, we found outcomes related to education. I know more about the world. I care more about the world. I'm able to speak and talk to people that are different from me. I understand my connections. I care more about my life. I appreciate my life. And I want to do more. I want to give back. I want to be a humanitarian. I want to vote. I'm going to do more. And now Invisible Children is expanding from the Coney movement, and this year they've just gotten a grant that we're involved in to train youth to be mobilized not just on this issue, but climate change and other issues around the world as well. So in closing, I think that these three pillars of storytelling, activism, and engagement are powerful on their own, but so incredibly powerful when combined that, see my little acronym, that they can combine to form a sea change. Note, that's the name of the institute that we just founded, plug, that they can form to really help change the way that we're solving problems with people all over. Thank you.